Title: The Fall of Fairview's Queen. The night was quiet in Fairview Estates, the kind of suburban neighborhood where the grass was always perfectly cut, the driveways spotless, and the rules strict enough to make a military base seem lenient. Nestled at the heart of this pristine paradise was Karen Thompson, the self-appointed ruler of the Homeowners Association, enforcer of order, and queen of complaints. Karen prided herself on maintaining Fairview's impeccable standards. Every mailbox placement, every hedge trim, and every minor infraction had to go through her. She was not just a board member, she was the HOA. If someone dared to challenge her authority, they would regret it. And until now, no one had dared. Then he arrived. Mark Reynolds. From the moment he moved into 425 Oak Lane, Karen knew he was in trouble. He ignored her first warning about his trash cans being left out too long. The second notice, regarding his grass being exactly 0.75 inches longer than HOA regulations permitted, was met with a smirk. And the third, about his driveway remaining wet too long after washing his car, had gone completely unanswered. That was war. She watched him through her window, arms crossed, her lips pursed into a thin line. He was quiet, kept to himself, and never caused a scene. But there was something wrong with him. She was sure of it. A man who defied HOA rules so casually had to be hiding something. Karen didn't know that Mark Reynolds was more than just a stubborn neighbor. He was an undercover FBI agent. And she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Karen's obsession with Mark deepened over the next few weeks. She documented everything: when he left the house, when he came home, what he wore, what kind of groceries he carried in. She took pictures from inside her house, peeked over his fence while pretending to walk her dog, and even logged his daily schedule in a notebook. Late at night, she sat at her laptop, typing furiously on the neighborhood forum. Police Garlight, police warning, police Garlight. Fairview Estates, we have a problem. I have personally observed strange behavior from the new resident at 425 Oak Lane. He drives an unmarked black SUV, possible criminal activity, keeps his lights off at night. What is he hiding? And has never attended an HOA meeting, highly suspicious. We must remain vigilant. Neighbors flooded the comments. Susan J. OMG. Karen, should we be worried? Tamar, call the cops. If he has weapons, that's serious. Brenda L. I knew something was off about him. Probably a criminal. Karen smiled, satisfied. The army was forming. The next morning, Karen marched up to Mark's front door, her HOA rulebook clutched tightly in one hand. She rang the doorbell twice. When the door finally opened, Mark leaned against the frame, looking more amused than annoyed. Let me guess, he said, his deep voice calm. You have a problem with my lawn again. Karen bristled. Sir, you are in violation of HOA Section 4B. Your trash cans were visible from the street for 20 minutes past collection time. This is your final warning. Mark exhaled a short laugh, shaking his head. Lady, I deal with criminals for a living. Do you think I care about a trash can violation? Karen froze. Criminals? Her mind reeled. What did he mean by that? Was he admitting something? Did he slip up? You need to comply with HOA standards, she snapped, regaining her composure. Mark crossed his arms. Or what? Karen's face burned. No one talked to her like this. Or I'll make sure you regret it. Mark's expression darkened, his gaze locking onto hers. That sounded like a threat. Karen lifted her chin. It's a promise. She turned on her heel and stormed back to her house. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Her hands shook as she dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? She took a deep breath, steadying her voice. There's a suspicious man in my neighborhood. He has guns. I think he's dangerous. Can you describe him? Karen licked her lips. Tall. Muscular. Military type. Keeps to himself. Drives a black SUV. I don't want to say this, but he might be a criminal. Has he threatened anyone? Well, no, but... Ma'am, is this an emergency or speculation? Karen huffed. Just send someone, all right? An hour later, 2 uniformed officers knocked on Mark's door. He answered calmly, holding up his FBI badge. The cops looked at the badge, then at Mark, then back at the badge. Mark smirked. She called, didn't she? The officers exchanged an awkward glance before nodding. Mark chuckled. Figures. Look, tell your dispatcher that Karen Thompson just made a false report. That's illegal, by the way. From her window, Karen watched the entire exchange. Her victory was supposed to be glorious. Instead, Mark had humiliated her. She clenched her fists. This wasn't over. She would make them believe her. And so, she dialed 911 again. 911, what's your emergency? Karen took a deep breath, injecting fear into her voice. I'm hiding in my house. My neighbor. He's armed. I saw him loading guns into his car. He said something about hurting people. The dispatcher's tone immediately changed. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? Karen whimpered. I don't know. But I heard him say something about needing to take care of loose ends. He's in some kind of criminal operation. I'm terrified. Please send help. This time, they wouldn't just send an officer. This time, they would take him down. At exactly 2 a.m., the quiet streets of Fairview Estates exploded into chaos. Blinding spotlights flooded Mark Reynolds' house. The low thumping of helicopter blades sliced through the silence. The screeching of tires echoed as a convoy of SWAT vehicles stormed the street, skidding to a halt. The doors flung open, and tactical officers in full gear poured out, their weapons trained on the house. From inside, Mark jolted awake. The booming voice of the SWAT commander shattered the night. This is law enforcement. Come out with your hands up. Mark blinked, his instincts immediately taking over. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. Years of training had conditioned him for high-stakes situations. He glanced around his darkened bedroom, spotting the telltale red laser dots dancing along the walls. With a slow, measured breath, he reached for his phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before a groggy but alert voice answered. Reynolds? What the hell? Mark's voice remained calm, despite the situation. SWAT's at my house. Get here. Now. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then the voice sharpened. On it. Mark set his phone down, raised his hands, and moved toward the door. Outside, the SWAT team stood ready, their rifles locked on the entrance. Suspect is exiting, an officer called. Mark stepped out slowly, his hands raised high, his breath controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The cold night air bit at his skin as he took careful, measured steps onto his porch. Get on your knees, the commander ordered. Mark didn't move. Instead, he locked eyes with the SWAT leader and uttered 2 words that sent a shockwave through the entire operation. Federal agent. The street fell into stunned silence. Then, in the distance, the sound of sirens. Dozens of them, growing louder by the second. A fleet of black SUVs roared into Fairview Estates, screeching to a halt just behind the SWAT vehicles. The doors swung open, and 4 agents in tactical gear stepped out. Their expressions were unreadable, but their presence was commanding. The SWAT leader turned, clearly confused. We have a situation here. One of the FBI agents, a sharp-jawed man in a navy blue suit, stepped forward. His tone was ice. No, you have a false report issue. The SWAT commander stiffened. Excuse me. The agent held up a file. Mark Reynolds is one of ours. You just surrounded a federal officer's house based on a fabricated call. The SWAT commander paled. Mark exhaled, crossing his arms. He nodded toward Karen's house. If I had to guess, he said dryly, the real suspect is about 100 feet that way. Every officer turned toward Karen Thompson's house. Inside, Karen had been watching everything from behind her blinds, her fingers twitching with excitement. This was it. They were finally taking down that dangerous man. Then she saw the black SUVs, and the men in suits, and the way the SWAT officers suddenly seemed uncertain. Something was wrong. Then came the knock at her door. Hard, loud, unrelenting. Karen's stomach twisted. Mrs. Thompson, open up. Federal agents. Her blood ran cold. Federal? This wasn't how it was supposed to go. With shaking hands, she unlocked the door, barely cracking it open before she was yanked outside and pushed against the wall. What are you doing? I'm the victim here, she shrieked. The lead agent held up a file. Mrs. Thompson, you made a false police report on a federal officer. That's a felony. Karen's world tilted. No. This is a mistake. He's the criminal. He has guns. I saw. Of course, he has guns, the agent snapped. He's an FBI agent. The words slammed into Karen like a wrecking ball. Her knees buckled, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But then came the handcuffs, cold steel clamping around her wrists. Her screams filled the night. As the agents loaded Karen into the patrol car, the neighbors who had been peeking through their windows erupted into cheers. Susan Jenkins, from 3 houses down, called out, "Wait. Does this mean Karen's not in charge of the HOA anymore?" The lead FBI agent smirked. "Considering she's going to be in federal custody for a while, I'd say that's a safe bet." A stunned silence followed. Then, pure celebration. "Yes," someone shouted. Jim, a longtime resident, grabbed a bucket of red paint and walked straight up to the ugly Inno Street parking sign Karen had forced on them last year. Without hesitation, he dumped the entire bucket over it. Another neighbor started pulling out decorations Karen had fined them for. Within minutes, Fairview Estates turned into a block party. Music blasted from someone's Bluetooth speaker. A cooler full of beer appeared. Someone fired up a grill. Karen, sitting miserably in the back of the patrol car, could only watch as the neighborhood rejoiced at her downfall. Karen's ride to the station was agonizing. The booking process was humiliating: fingerprints, mugshots, the cold, itchy orange jumpsuit. Then came the charges. Filing a false police report on a federal agent, felony. Wasting law enforcement resources, criminal offense. Harassment, multiple documented complaints. Her lawyer, a frazzled public defender who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, gave her bad news after bad news. The judge, not in the mood for HOA nonsense. The prosecutor, eager to make an example out of her. Karen tried to argue. "I was just looking out for my neighborhood." The judge's expression remained ice cold. By lying to the police and trying to ruin a man's life. The gavel slammed. 6 months of community service. A massive fine. A permanent criminal record. Her reign of terror was officially over. Months later, after being forced to sell her beloved house, Karen drove by Fairview Estates, unable to resist the urge to check in. And that's when she saw it. Her once pristine home was now a rental property. And not just any rental property. Mark Reynolds had bought it and rented it out to loud college students. The once quiet home was now the loudest on the block. Lawn flamingos. A massive pool in the backyard. A neon sign in the window that read, "Karen's retirement home." Karen, stuck at a red light, stared in horror. And Mark? He lifted his beer in silent acknowledgement. Game. Set. Match.